As we discussed, we'll be reading The Diary of Anne Frank, the play. As you recall, Anne Frank and her family had to go into hiding during World War II because they were Jewish and were being persecuted by the Nazi Party. Before we read the play, we need to take a look at what was happening during World War II and what the Holocaust was. So let's go ahead and start by taking a look at who was involved in World War II. As you can see, these were the major players during the war. We have the Allied powers. On one side, this was the United States, United Kingdom, various other countries fighting against the Axis powers, where we have Nazi Germany, Japan, Italy, and several other countries as well. So why did World War II happen? In order to fully understand how World War II started, we need to take a look at what happened during World War I. At the time, World War I was thought to be the last great war. It eventually ended when the Treaty of Versailles was signed. It marked the end of World War I. However, Germany was largely blamed for the war. Germany was required by the treaty to pay the most in reparations, meaning they had to pay for the damages caused by the war. In addition to that, they lost much of their national territory. So how did Germany react to the Treaty of Versailles? Germany had been devastated by the war and didn't have money to pay for the damages as required by the treaty. Most Germans were extremely angry about the terms of the treaty, thinking that the conditions were too harsh. For the next several years, Germans were in a state of political and social unrest, and a new government was instituted. Germany experienced a severe economic recession and depression. Panic was widespread, and unemployment, homelessness, and starvation were rampant. This unrest in Germany eventually led or paved the way for the Nazis to come into power. So during this time of turmoil and unrest in Germany, a new government was instituted, and the Nazi Party rose to power. Adolf Hitler became the leader of the Nazi Party. He had fought as a German soldier in World War I, and in addition, he was a powerful speaker and had the ability to affect his listeners' emotions and spur them into action. So he was really good at encouraging people and persuading people to do what he wanted and believe what he wanted. He promised the Germans jobs, and he ended up keeping his promise because unemployment went from about 33%, it went down to about 5%. So a lot of people got their jobs back. He eventually was elected the leader of Germany, and he helped instill a sense of pride and patriotism back into the German nation. He built an extremely powerful military as well. He also controlled the media, which meant German people only had access to information that Hitler wanted them to know. Anything negative about him or the party was suppressed. Hitler used the media and propaganda for his own agenda and gave Germany someone to blame for their problems. So he basically gave Germany a scapegoat for their problems, and he blamed the Jewish people for everything that was happening in Germany. So here are some pictures of Hitler, different pictures of him here. Okay, so we need to look at what happened in World War II. Germany started the war by invading Poland. In response to this, Britain and France declared war. Germany then defeated Poland and began invading surrounding European countries. The U.S. did not enter the war right away, but eventually we did on December 7th, 1941. If you remember why, it's because Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. So if you remember from one of the previous slides, Japan was one of the Axis powers that sided with Germany. During this time, the Holocaust had been initiated in Germany and in other European countries. So U.S. was trying to stay out of the war. They didn't want to get involved. But then one of the Axis powers, Japan, bombed Pearl Harbor, and that pushed the United States to get involved. But by the time U.S. did get involved, and by the time they did step in, the Holocaust was already happening in Europe. Okay, so what was the Holocaust and how could it happen? And I have this warning down here just because some of the images that that are on the slide and that you can see if you look up the Holocaust, they are graphic, and it's not for the light of heart, but it's something that we should remember. So that's why the warning's down here. Okay, so Hitler believed that the Germans were an Aryan race. Basically, he thought that they were superior to other races, and his idea of a superior or Aryan race is being a white European of the blonde Nordic type. Holocaust actually comes from a Greek word meaning sacrifice by fire. And when we refer to the Holocaust, we're referring to the systematic killing of millions of Jews and other ethnic groups. Some of the other groups that were being exterminated or killed were Jehovah's Witnesses, disabled, homosexuals, gypsies, politicians, and anybody who did not agree with the Nazi beliefs. So how could something like the Holocaust happen? As we said before, Hitler helped solve some of the country's problems by creating jobs. He offered a simple economic solution by blaming the Jews and other groups that were not considered part of the Aryan race. And once people realized what was happening, it was too late. By then, Hitler and the Nazis had seized complete and total control. If anybody opposed the Nazi Party, they were arrested and killed. So this allowed Hitler to further his agenda by whatever means necessary. Hitler, he offered several solutions to fix Germany's problems. He believed in extreme nationalism. He believed Germany was above all other nations, and he wanted to cleanse the country. So again, he believed that the Aryan race was the original German race and that the Jews and other lesser races should be exterminated. And he felt that he could start a world empire on these beliefs. And before we look further into the Holocaust and World War II, just think about some of these words. I know you've heard a couple of them before. We talked about prejudice the other day, judgment, or opinion formed beforehand, a favoring or dislike for unfair reasons or without foreknowledge of the facts, so a bias. And then racism, the belief that certain races of men are superior to others. Discrimination, which is another word that you guys have heard before, against the members of one or more races based on such beliefs. And then another word I'm not sure that you guys have seen before, it's anti-Semitism, which means prejudice against or hatred of Jews. Okay, so who was being persecuted? Jews of Europe, so Jewish people all over Europe were being persecuted. Roma or gypsies, anyone who was mentally or physically handicapped or disabled, other, not just Jewish people, but other groups of religious people like Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals, and anybody who aided these groups or who didn't support the Nazi Party. Okay, so it wasn't just Jews, it was several other groups of people, basically anyone who did not, or who the Nazis did not believe was a part of the Aryan race, who was persecuted during the Holocaust. Okay, so this is a chart showing how many people were killed during the war. So here we have the different groups of people. As I said, there was, more groups than I mentioned before. And how many were killed during the war. And then we have the different concentration and death camps and how many people were killed in each of those camps. And then this, obviously, the most people that were targeted and killed were the Jewish people. So this is a chart showing how many Jews were killed during the Holocaust. Okay, so it's can be hard when you're learning about history and you're seeing numbers like that. You know, we didn't live it. It's hard to remember that these aren't just numbers. These were real people. They all had families, ideas, feelings, friends, hopes. They had dreams just like you and me. They were men, women, children, everyone. So to kind of put it into perspective, this is a picture. It's taken from one of the concentration or death camps, and it is a huge pile of shoes that were taken from camp prisoners. So hopefully that can kind of put this into perspective for you. All right, steps to the Holocaust. Obviously this didn't happen overnight. It did occur, you know, gradually over time. It began with the idea that one race or group of people is better than another group of people. This was then followed by small persecutions or abuses like name-calling, harassment, and small acts of violence. Many Jews weren't allowed to enter certain stores. They were then required to wear a star on their clothing to identify them and set them apart from everyone else. And Jewish businesses and homes were often attacked and destroyed. Violence against Jews became normal. Other examples of persecution included Jewish businesses being shut down, children were not allowed to go to schools or synagogues, and the synagogues, which are places of Jewish worships, were shut down, and Jewish people were denied access to public entertainment. So to kind of step back, you know, it's really scary to think that something so horrific as the Holocaust could begin with a simple idea followed by something that seems as small as name-calling. Kind of think back to the film we watched in class with the teacher that was conducting the experiment with her students. And think about how the students began to behave once the teacher told them that a certain eye color was better than, you know, if you had blue eyes, you were better than the brown eyes. And think about how easy it was for the children to start changing their behavior just based on an idea. Okay, so then around 1939, concentration camps were developed, and Jewish people and other groups were gathered and sent to these camps. As you can see pictures above, they're being sent to the camps. Ghettos and transit camps and forced labor camps were also developed. Ghettos were separate areas within different cities where Jewish people were forced to live. These areas were overcrowded, and Germans controlled the amount of food and necessities that people within the city were allowed. Many people died in the camps, many people died in the ghettos, but specifically the camps. They died there from mistreatment, starvation, and disease, and being killed off. Men, women, children, young, old, weak, it didn't make a difference to the Nazis. If you were not Aryan, if you were Jewish, you know, it didn't make a difference. You could be persecuted by the Nazi Party. Eventually, during the final months of the war, extermination camps were developed where millions more people were murdered. Here's a couple pictures of gas chambers that were built in the concentration camps. The doors were often marked with the word shower. They would pack as many people into these rooms as possible, and instead of water coming out of the pipes, it was poisonous gas, and it would kill every single person in the chamber. So this is a gas chamber, and over here the second picture is of ovens that were used to cremate the bodies after they were gassed and killed in the chamber. So this was the final step. This was Hitler's final solution to Germany's problems, and it was to kill off or exterminate an entire race of people. So he wanted to completely kill off and get rid of the Jewish people. Alright, I am running out of time for this video, so I'm going to end it here. Please go ahead and click into part 2 of the video. and when I start, we'll start on this screen. So go ahead and click Part 2 and watch Part 2 for the remainder of the PowerPoint to complete your notes.